Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, daf Tebav. Today's daf is dedicated to our amazing mom and grandma, Patty Belkin, love Jason, Erica, Raquel, Ellie, Ariel, and Pili. And today's daf is dedicated to the earthquake victims and their families. May we find more living and help more of those displaced. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and with their families. Okay, we're going to get started with Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Hanina, who was on the previous daf. So we saw that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Hanina had this opinion. We compared it to a woman in Nida who doesn't yet go to the mikvah. Same idea, where until you do the finishing part of the process, you're still in it. The prohibitions are still upon you. Same thing with the Nazir, who doesn't yet finish the process and do the shaving and the sacrifices. However, the question is, you still get lashes. Is it the same severity? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hanina actually distinguished between impurity, where he said you get lashes if you become impure to a dead person, and the other issues, which is the cutting your hair and the drinking wine, where he said you don't get lashes for that. To which the Gemara then said, why? Theoretically, if you're going to have a question about, if you're going to say, maybe you learn it from the words kol, because it says all the days by Chuma. It says those same words by all three. So that's not going to be it. We're starting now at the top of our daf, to which we're going to answer Shane Hacha de Amar Rachmana. There's a unique verse by impurity of the dead, and it says B'timei rosh nizro. Okay, so let's read the whole verse, and then we'll explain how he gets it from here. V'chi yamut met alav befeta pitom. If somebody dies upon you, all of a sudden, meaning you weren't prepared and all of a sudden you became impure to the dead person. Vitime rosh nizro. What does it mean? You defiled or made impure the head of your nizirut. Now, what does the head of your nizirut refer to? Mishen nizro taloi lo berosho. What it's saying here is, what you're saying, even someone whose nizirut is only dependent on your hair, meaning you haven't yet shaved your hair and done that process of purification. So because of that, you're a Nazir, and then you become impure, meaning not because you're within your 30 days, you're beyond that. Again, it's a drasha. It's not the simple reading of the verse, but because it specifically talks about that your hair is, you defiled your hair, sounds like the fact that you haven't shaved your hair is what's causing you to be a Nazir. Theoretically, you could infer that, which means that you're talking about a Nazir who that's all they haven't done yet, that and the sacrifices, and specifically it's written by impurity to the dead. So therefore, we're going to assume that's why Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Hanina gets it from, that it's a unique halacha only for impurity. Again, all the other things are still forbidden. It's just you're not going to get lashes for going against them. However, we're now going to bring a tanaitic source to contradict Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Hanina. He's an Amora, and if you bring a contradictory tanaitic source, unless he has a way to say, well, there's another Tana I hold by, or I could read the source some other way, which here you're going to see it can't be read any other way, we're going to be left with a question against his approach, a difficulty with, a serious difficulty with what he said. Meitive. So meitive is a word that introduces a tanaitic source to contradict an Amora. Nazir shekalu lo yamav. You have a Nazir, exactly our case, who finished the counting, but hasn't yet finished the process. Asur legalech v'lishtot yain v'tamei l'metim. The same three prohibitions are still upon him. V'im gilach v'shata yain v'nitma l'metim. If he did any one of those prohibitions, again, there's a difference between cutting your hair and shaving it for the process of purification. We're obviously not talking about the shaving when he does it with the sacrifices. We're talking about he just either shaved all his hair or got a haircut without bringing the sacrifices. Then halesa sofeget ha'arba'im. Sofeget ha'arba'im is a term synonymous with he gets lashes, because the lashes are 40. It's really 40 minus 1, which is 39, but it's 40 lashes. It says in the Torah, so sofeget ha'arba'im means he gets lashes. So here you see he gets lashes for all three of them. Tiyuvta, the Gemara ends with a difficulty. New Mishna. To understand this Mishna, best to go back to the previous Mishna. We're going to have there was a lot of confusion about how to understand this Mishnah. I'm going to give you two interpretations, although there are even more, presumably. And there's some girsa problems, which means problems with the text. And we're going to take out some words. In general, today we're going to have this in a few situations. But again, every time we do that, mean that obviously someone thought those words belong there and explained it differently. So our previous Mishnah had said, if I am a Nazir on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet, if I am a Nazir and I say, I'm going to be a Nazir when my child is born, and then you say, but I'm a Nazir now, so, or you said, V'hareini v'in Nazir, and I'm a Nazir. So we said that since your child's not born yet, you start counting 30 days for the first one. Then child's born, let's say on day 20, like we said when we learned this. Child's born on day 20, what do? You pause the Nazirut, right? The Mishnah had said, right, you put your Nazirut aside, Monet shel beno, v'achar kach mashlim et shelo. So then again, happened on day 20, you count days 21 to 30 to 50 for the second term of Nazir, for really what was your first term, because you first said for my son. So that's going to click in first now, and as soon as it happens, you start counting. You count till day 50, and then mashlim et shelo, which we explained as, and then you complete the last 10 days. And then we had this whole debate. When do you do the shaving? Do you do it twice? Do you do it once? Do you do shaving once at the end and do double sacrifices, or maybe single sacrifices? Perhaps you do the shaving on day 50, and then you're going to need to, you only count 10 days for the next one, but you're going to need hair growth for another 20. The Rambam actually understands mashlim et shelo totally differently, and that's going to be affected by how he reads our Mishnah. You're going to see why. Mashlim et shelo, he said, means you actually have to start the first one all over again, because you need a unit of 30, and without a unit of 30, you can't count Nazirut. So he's going to understand you're going to end up with an 80-day term. Let's say that was the scenario. 20 days first, those 20 days are basically erased. If your son is born within those 30 days, you're going to have to start all over again. So now we're going to have a Mishnah that's a little bit different, but really very, very similar. And the main difference is going to be that in this case, there's going to be a possibility that you can overlap the days, okay? Where you're going to still have either, according to the Rambam, you'll still have 30 days at the end because you took on a longer period of Nizirut, 100 days. Or theoretically, since you still have more than 30 days left at the end, maybe you can actually put them both together and have them overlap entirely. So again, it's going to depend on how you read this Mishnah. There's two interpretations. So let's start our Mishnah without further ado. Nazir ben. So sounds the same as before. I'll be a Nazir when I have a child. Vin Nazir me'ayom. And I'm going to be a Nazir for 100 days. So now the 100 days starts clicking. Let's say on day 20, you have, right, you have the child. Now you're left with 80 days at the end. So again, we're going to read this in two different ways. Nolad lo ben ad shiv'im. If it's until day 70, anytime up until day 70, lo hifsid klum. You didn't lose anything. What does it mean you didn't lose anything? So there's two possibilities. Either, according to Tosfot, and Tosfot is very interesting. Tosfot is found on our Mishnah on page Yud Gimel Amud Bet. Maybe by Tosfot, the Mishnahs were written together in the Gemara, and therefore it was back there, but it ends up, it's on the wrong page. Find the Tosfot that I'm quoting there at the top of the page, the second Tosfot, Nazir me'ayom v'nolad lo ben ad shivim lo hifsid klum, because Tosfot's on those words. Anyway, Tosfot there explains the following. It says, since, what's the difference between this and the previous case? When you have that child, you theoretically could still have 30 days or more left to your Nazirut, which means that lo hifsid klum, you don't have to keep 130 days, right? In the last case, you had to keep 60 altogether. You took on 2 terms of Nazirut. In this case, they could overlap. Since you still have 30 days left to your Nazirut of the first one, and now you took upon yourself 30 days of Nazirut, right? Your son was born. You're supposed to keep Nazirut right now. You end up, you could overlap them. And altogether, all you have to do is 100 days, including, right? You basically fulfilled everything. What's his issue with the next line? Well, right? So ad shivim lo hifsid klum, meaning you didn't lose any days, meaning you said 100 and you said your son, it all is all in one. La'achar shivim, soter shivim. Now I'm going to get rid of this word shivim at the end. Most of the commentaries get rid of it, and it's going to appear in the Gemara a few times. We're going to just always not read it. But la'achar shivim soter. After 70, it's going to knock out. Now here comes the tricky part with Tosfot. It's going to, soter usually means it's like when you're soter a building, you knock it down. Okay, so After 70, what does it mean, soter? It doesn't really mean soter. You don't erase anything. You don't wipe anything out. If it's after 70, let's say it happens on day 80, since you're only left with 20 of the nizirut that you started right away, and now you need a 30-day nizirut, you can't overlap them. What do you have to do? You have to, just like the previous Mishna, the way we understood it, you basically stop, pause the nizirut of the 80 days, of the 100 days at day 80, keep a full term of nizirut for your son, and then go back and finish the last 20 days. Okay, that's what he would say. Okay, that's how Tosfot reads this Mishnah. And now he explains, and here's the difficult line for him. First of all, soter was a little bit difficult according to this commentary. And she'ein tiglacha pachot mishloshim yom. Because you can't have a term of nizirut without having a shaving of 30 days. Now, that doesn't really work with this. Tosfot himself says, you're right, the wording doesn't work with me. And he says it must be she'ein nizirut pachot mishloshim yom. What he's trying to say is, since the term for your son has to be minimally 30 days, and if you want to overlap, it won't fully overlap. You're going to end up with, and now the question is, why couldn't this work? Why couldn't you, right, it really doesn't make so much sense going to Tosfot. So overlap it for 20 days and then just continue another 10 of the son by himself. So Tosfot explains, again, whether you buy this or not is a good question, whether you agree with this. But again, like I said, every time there's difficulty in the text, it's because all the opinions don't work fully well, and there's always something that doesn't make perfect sense. It's good to always analyze and say what's good about, what's strong, what works with Tosfot, what doesn't. I'll show you at the end what is good about Tosfot. But what happens here is that since you're going to have some days of the son nizirut, as we call it, because you took it on when your son was born, by themselves, so then we don't overlap them at all. If they can be completely overlapped, then it works. If they can't be completely overlapped and the son's going to have a bunch of days on their own, we basically make all the son's days on their own and pause and then replay, right? Start where you ended with the second term of nizirut. So again, you'll do 80, for example, right? Let's say it happened on day 80, 30, and then another 20. And then you're going to end up with 130 days. So that's the difference between what's good about this is hifsid or sotel. We're going to have lo hifsid, you didn't lose anything because in the first option, you get to overlap and you only have to do 100 days. That's strong because lo hifsid, you didn't lose anything, meaning you end up with 100 days. You can overlap them. And what's good about it is it also matches the previous Mishnah. Because what did we do with the previous Mishnah? We paused and then restarted where we ended, according to the simple reading, okay, not the Rambam's reading. So again, let me just summarize because it's a little bit tricky. The reading of Tosfot is the previous Mishnah was there was no option to overlap because you were never going to end up with 30-day period at the end because the whole time period was only 30 days to begin with. So since that's the case, you can only pause, do the other nizirut, and continue. In this case, you have an option where it overlaps. So when it can overlap, great. Let it overlap, but only if it can fully overlap, like in the previous Mishnah. In the previous Mishnah, you also theoretically could have had it partially overlap, but we don't give you that option. We don't give you that option here either. Rambam has a different approach. He says that when we say that the option of stop, pause, and restart only exists in this first case. If you're going to have 30-day period at the end, when you do your, right, Rambam doesn't let you just pause it and restart unless you have 30 days at the end, because back to the line in our Mishnah, ein tiglacha pachot mishloshim yom, which also fits in with the option that maybe you shave at the end of the second of the, right, when you do the one for your son, you shave at the end and then you need a full period of nizirut at the end. And that's why the Rambam explained the previous Mishnah, mashlim et shelo, you then, mashlim is you fill it in, right? We thought that meant you finish it up. According to the Rambam, you have to start all from the beginning. And now let's read our Mishnah according to the Rambam. So Hareini Nazir, I'm starting back at the beginning. L'chashiyeli ben, v'nazir me'ayom. So nolad lo ben ad shivim, if it's until 70 days, and you're going to be left with a 30-day period at the end, then lo ifsi klum. Now, what is lo ifsi klum? It doesn't mean you get to overlap the Naziriyot. No, 130 days, but at least you don't need more than 130 days. You took upon yourself 100 days and 30 days. So you don't lose anything because you can still do your 100, you can still do your 30. You do it as 70, 30, 30, right? You go back at the last 30 and fill in, right, the 30 days you were missing. But la'achar shivim, then soter. If it's after shivim, you were at 80, then basically it knocks out. Now, it doesn't knock out all your days, and that's why soter shivim doesn't really make sense. But it's soter, it does erase some of the days. Why? Because the Rambam needs a full 30 days at the end of it. Since you need a 30-day period for tiglachat, for the shaving, you're basically going to need, you can't have these pause, restart, continue where you left off unless you have a full 30-day period at the end. So in this case, you could have that because you could have 70 and 30 or 50 and 50 or whatever it might be. But once you pass day 70, if the child's born after day 70, you're stuck because you're not going to have a 30-day period. And then if you're at day 80, for example, so you're going to end up with an extra 10 days. You're going to have to do 140 days altogether, 80, 30, and 30. Okay, and that will take you to 140. If you're at 90, okay, obviously you can do the math and figure out you're going to need an extra 20 days. So that's the Rambam's way of reading the Mishnah. So we have two different ways of reading this Mishnah, two very different ways because you get to very different conclusions. Amar Rav. Rav now comes and says, and we're basically going to deal with Rav for the rest of today. We're going to leave the simple reading of the Mishnah and how we read it. It doesn't make so much of a difference. Now we're going to learn about Rav. Rav says, Yom Shiv'im Oleh Lekan Ulekan. Rav says this day 70, let's say it happens on day 70. Day 70, your son is born, your child is born. You now count that day, both, okay, now it's going to be, I'll start with one and then I'll even get to where it goes even farther. Since your son was born on that day counts as day number 1 of your count of the 30 days for your son. In addition, since you're now counting this as if it's the first day for the son, so let's say, right, your son's born at midday. So in the morning, it counted as day 70 for the previous one, right, for your 100 days. Now, since you can start this as day 1 of your son, which is going to overlap with the new one, we basically count day 70 also as day 71 of your original count. It basically counts as 2 days, okay? Where do we see things like this? And the Gemara is going to even bring it in Shiva and Shloshim and all that, right? We say Miktzat Hayom Kekulo. And there's even an opinion that day 7 counts as part of your Shloshim already. We're going to see that inside. So that's the way I think you can see it better. Okay, the case we're going to bring up, I'll already tell you, is if the regel, the holiday, okay, a holiday cancels Shiva and a holiday cancels Shloshim, right? If you're in Shloshim, it'll cancel Shloshim. If you're in Shiva, it'll cancel Shiva. So what if on day 7, right, that's Erev of the holiday, okay? The holiday comes in on day 8. So you, on day 7, it counted both as day 7 of Shiva and of day 8 as if it was the first day of Shloshim. And therefore, according to what we're going to see an opinion, it cancels out. It counts as both, and your Shloshim is gone already by the next day. So that's kind of what we're saying here. And then what's the ramification here? The ramification is that if day 70, your child was born, and you immediately start counting it as the first day of your son's Nizirut, and then since your day is kind of split, you get to also count it as day 71, then instead of ending at day 100 and bringing your sacrifices at day 101, you actually end on day 99 and bring your sacrifices on day 100. So you've gained a day, basically. Okay? So that's what Rav is basically saying. That's the ramification of Rav. So the Gemara is going to bring 2 questions against him from our Mishnah. The first question we're going to resolve. The second question is not going to be resolved, and then we're going to have to see what to do with it. If the Mishnah contradicts Rav, how is Rav going to manage it? So the first question is this. Tznan, it says in our Mishnah, Nolad lo ad shiv'im lo hifsid klum. If it's born until the 70th day, you didn't lose anything. V'isal kadat hacholeh lekan ulekan. If you're going to say, by the way, this would be true even if it wasn't day 70, if it was day 69 or any day before, because as soon as you midday or at some point in the day, you start counting it as the count for this new son that was born, it already counts as an additional day, right? That one day counts as 2 days for your count of 100. So why would it say lo hifsi klum? Lo hifsi klum says means you don't lose out on anything. It should have said you get rewarded. You get, right, you benefit extra, that you basically gain a day where you don't have to be a Nazir, because you can do the whole process one day earlier. So instead of saying you didn't lose anything, it should actually say you gained. It doesn't say that. So they don't really think that's such a problem for Rav. They say, but ad shivim. Okay, they're missing some keywords here. I'm going to add. Okay, really, they shouldn't have said ad shivim lo hifsid, until 70 you don't lose. Umishum deketa, I'm adding the words you don't lose, because that's really what it means. It shouldn't have really said that. But why did they use that language? Umishum dekana seifa achar shivim sotil. And I'm skipping the word shivim here because, again, we don't have that language. So, right, in the text of the Gemara, in case you're not looking inside, it says achar shivim soter shivim. But the second shivim we're getting rid of. That, according to most commentaries, is a mistake. Since it says in the second part, after 70, you lose. So they said in the beginning part, katani reisha, shivim, and again, they're missing the key words, lo hipsid. Okay, you didn't lose. Okay, so basically we have you lose versus you don't lose, rather than you lose versus you gain. Now, theoretically, you could have said you lose or you gain, but they felt it was more you lose or you don't lose. And they were focusing more on that you don't have to add extra days. Whether one got cut off and made it shorter, well, you know, it could have talked about that, but it didn't really care about that so much. That's the answer. But in the end, anyway, we're going to say the Mishna doesn't work like Rav. So even if you're not convinced by this answer, we're going to see it's not, in any case, the Mishna is not going to work according to Rav. So here's our second question. Tashmami Seifa. Let's learn from the second part of the Mishna. Nolad achar shivim soter. Again, I'm skipping that next word, shivim. If you're born after the 70th day, it's a problem. Now, think about the math. What's the problem? After 70, let's say the kid's born day 71. So now count 30 from day 71. Just like you count from 1 to 30, you count from 71. 30 days, you get to 100. Then it would be perfectly overlapping, right? So it shouldn't be 70. It should be 71 according to Rav, because according to Rav, if day, right, it says if day 71 counts lekanu lekan, right, then 71 would be 72, right, also, and then you'd be able to finish on day 100. So basically, you would finish on day 100 and bring it on 101. So according to him, the lot of achar shivim sotil, to which they say, what's achar? Right, 71 should work. To which they say, my achar, achar. When it says after 70, it really means 72. That's not exactly very convincing. If they wanted to say 72, they would have said 72 and not, right? They would have said after 71. So it's a bit of a problem. So now they say, okay, so then you want to say, you want to say then, if it's 71, then it's not soter, right? They're focusing first on the seifa, which is if it's after 70, then it's a problem, right? Then you're going to need, it's soter, which really means after is what they're saying, which means what? That 71 is fine, right? Then now we go back to the reisha. But then the reisha makes no sense. Until 70, you don't lose out on anything. It should be until 71, you don't lose out on anything. Okay? Because 71 is going to count also 72, and then you're going to basically be done, right, when you're all at the same time. So why does it say, tanna ad shivim lo hifsid klum? Afilu achar shivim nami, right? Even after shivim, it should still work. So ha'amar lo satal, and you said it's not sotil. So elash mamina achar mamash. So basically, you can't switch the word shivim with shivim ve'achad unless it said shivim ve'achad. Can't possibly be. So Rav really can't work in with the Mishna, which they're going to say, v'chein matnitin l'Rav shma mina. This literally translates as the Mishna is like Rav, but what it really means is the opposite. There may be something missing here. It doesn't really make much sense, but what they're saying is the Mishna, according to Rav, doesn't make any sense, or it doesn't work according to Rav, in which case, Shema Mina, we're going to infer that the Mishna does not work together with Rav. So now we have a problem. Why do we have a problem? Well, Rav is an Amora, and Mishnayot have to work with Amoraim. But wait, don't we have a concept? Maybe you remember this. Rav Tana Hu Upali. Rav was the first Amora, and he is often given status that he can disagree with the Mishnah if he wants. He can disagree with any Talmudic source. He's very different than any other Amorah. Okay, once in a blue moon, you might see this with someone else, but almost never. Rav is the one who we always say, Tanahu Palik. He has status like a Tana and can argue over a Mishnah or any Talmudic source. So theoretically, the Gemara could have easily said, okay, no problem, Rav Tanahu Palik can be done. But Gemara only uses Rav Tanahu Palik as an answer if it's their last resort. They'd rather treat Rav, if they can, like everybody else, and try to say that Rav maybe was relying on some other Tana. They'd rather go that way if they can. And for the rest of today's daf and a bit into tomorrow's, we're going to try to figure out who is the Tana that Rav holds on. So again, Rav counts the 70th day both. He counts it both as day 70 of the original and day 71 of the 100 count also. Because it also counts as the first day of the sun, we're also going to count it as day 71. It's going to basically count in two different ways. We're going to kind of split the day in half. And it's also based on this concept of miksarayom kekulo. Because we could say you already kind of finished your day 70 when the sun was born. It's as if it's like a cutoff and we start a new day. So now they want to know, Rav Keman Amar L'Shmata. So what Tana did Rav hold on? We're going to have two possibilities here. Abba Shaul, maybe you'll say he holds like Abba Shaul. And there's a study guide, by the way, which organizes the structure of the daf that I forgot to mention earlier. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishna, Hakover et meto. If you want to actually just go through the structure, I'll review where we are right now. We started with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hanina, not connected to our topic at all. And we basically said Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hanina has this opinion of the Tuma is different than the other two prohibitions. You get lashes for them, you don't get for the other. We tried to prove it, right? Yesterday, we tried to prove from some other place. It didn't work from the verses. We now took one verse and said we can learn it from there. Special verse by impurity. Then we rejected his whole opinion because we said, but there's a braita that goes against what he said. Then we brought our Mishna, which we explained according to Tosfot and the Rambam in two very different ways about, right, the difference between this Mishna and the other is that it's a much longer period of time than Nazir that started immediately. And therefore, there could be this time for overlap, according to Tosfot or according to Rambam. There could be 30 days left at the end, and that's what makes all the difference. And so the question is it the overlap that makes all the difference, that they can fully overlap, and then it would be even, you could basically do them at the same time. According to us, or according to Rambam, you would need 30 extra days, but at least you would need more than that, right? As long as you have 30 at the end, it's not a problem. In the previous Mishnah, you didn't have 30 left, so you'd have to add more days. And then we brought this opinion of Rav about the Shiv'im Oleh Lekan U'Lekan. We brought two difficulties from the Mishnah. The first one we were able to resolve, but the second one we weren't. So now we basically say Rav stands alone, but he must have some other Tana he holds like, and we're going to try to figure out which one that is. And to do that, we're going to bring totally different topics that relate to the same concept of Miksarayom Kikulo, part of the day counting as an entire day, and basically having a day that can go in two different directions. It can count both as this and as that. So first, we're going to go into the world of Avelut, where we're going to talk about Shiva and Shloshim, as I already told you before. Then we're going to go into the world of purity and impurity. We're going to talk about people who are both pure and impure on the same day. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. So maybe like Abba Shaul, Ditnan, as the Mishnah says, Hakover et meto shlosha yamin kodem laregel. By the way, this Mishnah, both opinions are not going to do what we do nowadays. What we do nowadays is if you have Shiva for a part of one day, and then the holiday comes in, it cancels all of Shiva. But these two opinions say it has to be minimum 3 days for it to work. Okay, so Ditnan, Hakover et meto, if you bury the dead, your relative, 3 days before the holiday, that cancels Shiva. Okay, that's an issue I'm not getting into. We talked about in Moed. If it was 8 days before the regel, then you had your Shiva, you had a day of Shloshim, and then it cancels your Shloshim. Now there's this side issue, which is since it's Erev HaRegel, even though you're in Shloshim on day number 8, you can still shave Erev HaRegel in honor of the holiday. And comes Tanakama and says, being lo siper Erev HaRegel, asur l'saper achar HaRegel. If you didn't shave before the holiday, well, then you can't shave after the holiday, meaning it didn't really cancel your Shloshim if you decided for it not to. Okay, now you can view this in two ways. Either you didn't treat it like you were taking the regel seriously, and therefore it's not going to cancel your shloshim. You didn't treat it with proper respect, so we're not going to let it do what it's supposed to do for you and cancel your shloshim. Or maybe it's a penalty, like you should have done it for the regel, and we're going to penalize you, and therefore not say that the shloshim is canceled. Okay, that's the Tanna Kama. Again, this is a side point, not germane to our issue, so I'm going to keep going. Abba Shaul Omer. Now we're on Amud Bet, and we're going to get to the opinion we were looking for. He disagrees with Tanna Kama about the following things. Afilu lo siper kodem haregel. Says, no. What do you mean? Shloshim is canceled no matter what. It has nothing to do with whether you cut your hair or shave on the regel, on the erev, on the day before the holiday. He says, afilu lo siper kodem haregel, mutar l'siper achar haregel. Your shloshim is canceled. You can get a haircut after the regel. Just like, so number one, he disagrees with him about that one point. And in a second, you're going to see what else he disagrees about. He says, just like doing, 3 days of Avelut cancels the entire Shiva if the holiday comes in. Likewise, 7 days, now notice he doesn't say 8. This is the second point he disagrees with Tanna Kama. Just doing 7 days of Avelut already gets rid of Shloshim. Now, that means basically that we know Mitzad Yom Kikulo. Generally, you get up from sitting Shiva in the morning of the 7th day. So therefore, Abba Shaul says, my time at Abba Shaul, what's his reason? Is it lav mishum de kasaval? Shvi ole lekan ulekan? Isn't it because he says 7 counts both as the last day of Shiva and, so morning, an hour in the morning counts already as your Shiva. The rest of the day counts as your Shloshim. So if the holiday comes in right after day 7, the holiday cancels your Shloshim also, because you're already in Shloshim. That's how one day could count in 2 different counts. That makes sense that it's just like Rav, who says 70, because it gets split in the middle by the birth of your son, and you start a new Nizirut. When you start the new Nizirut, you count it as the second day of, it's 71, it's 70 and 71 of your other count. To which the Gemara says, no. You can't necessarily say that Rav holds like Abba Shaul. Why? Dilma kano ka'amar Abba Shaul ela ba'avelut shiva d'Rabbanan. Avelut of 7 days is only rabbinic. Okay, if you're going to say Avelut is by a Torah law, it's really only the first day. But the rest of Shiva is all rabbinic. So when it comes to rabbinic law, we can be lenient and say, okay, this started your shloshim. It's all a rabbinic issue as it is. Aval ben Nazir d'oraita lo, but maybe Abba Shaul would say, when it comes to Nazirut, you said 100 days, you need 100 days. You can't start cutting corners and saying, oh, this day counts as 2. No way, no how. Again, we don't know, but we don't know, yes. So basically, this is rejected. So now we're going to try attempt number 2. El Rav d'amar ke Rabbi Yossi, ditanya, as it says in a braita, Rabbi Yossi omer. We need some background. Laws of zava. A woman has a bloody discharge, it's not during the time she's supposed to be getting her period. How we define that, that's a whole other story. We'll get to it in Mida. But the first day she starts to bleed, when it's not the time she's supposed to be bleeding with her menstrual bleeding, she basically is impure that day, waits till the next morning. She's called the shomeret yom keneged yom. That means for every day she sees, she has to wait one more day. She can already go to the mikveh in the morning, but she has to watch that whole day that she doesn't bleed. And if she does, then she has to do the same thing the next day. She has any bleeding that day. The next day is her 3rd day. She has to go to the mikveh in the morning. Then she waits. If nothing happens, great, she's fine. If she sees blood, she becomes a zava gdola, which then needs 7 clean days. And then she needs to bring sacrifices also in the time of the temple. So Rabbi Yossi says the following. Shomeret yom keneged yom. That means she saw blood one day. She's waiting for the next day to see. And it happens to be Erev Pesach. Okay, so she's supposed to do the Korban Pesach that day. Now, to do the Korban Pesach, you have to be pure. Now, what does she do? She goes to the mikveh in the morning. She doesn't have any bleeding. She's good. Shachatu v'zarku aleha b'sheni shela. So she's in the 2nd day right now. She saw blood one day. She's in her 2nd day waiting to see. She goes to the mikveh, so she's pure right now. And they slaughter the Korban Pesach with her in mind. If you remember, Korban Pesach, they have to keep you in mind. Okay, this was in last week's parsha or 2 weeks ago. So week and a half. So you have to be counted in among, so they slaughtered it with her in mind that she was part of the sacrifice. And then obviously what happens? Achar kach ra'ata. Then she sees blood after. Now, you do the Korban Pesach in the afternoon of the 14th, and the night on the Tevav, the 15th, that's when you eat the sacrifice. So now she's tameh. She can't eat the sacrifice at night. So what happens? She can't eat the sacrifice, but she doesn't have to do Pesach Sheni. Why? Pesach Sheni is the makeup. Why? Because they slaughter the Korban Pesach with her in mind. Now, wait a minute. What do you mean? She saw blood on day 1. When she sees blood on day 2, it's true she went to the mikveh in the morning, but when she sees blood on day 2, it's obvious she was still bleeding, and we would view this as a continuum, which meant that really retroactively she was impure that morning. She just didn't know it, right? But the end of the day kind of showed what was happening earlier in the day. But Rabbi Yossi, who basically says she fulfilled her mitzvah of Korban Pesach, she wasn't impure earlier in the day. Only when she saw the blood did she become impure. Must be my time de Rabbi Yossi, la mishum de kasabal, miktzad hayom kikulo. And now, again, there's the girsa problem here, the text. I'm going to read the girsa that we're skipping the next 4 words, and it should have a vav before mikan, and says the following. So number 1, miktzad hayom kikulo, and mikanu lahabahu mitameh. So how do we read this? This means that what Rabbi Yossi is holding is the following. In the morning, it's true she had seen blood the day before, but she went to the mikveh and she's now pure. The fact that she sees blood later that day, that just makes her impure now. But miktzad hayom kikulo, and when she sees the blood, mikanu l'habak, from there on in, not retroactively. It doesn't go and make her impure from the morning. And that's why her Korban Pesach was done properly and all was good. And it's only now that she's not going to be able to eat it. But she actually fulfilled her mitzvah of the Korban Pesach without eating it. Okay, so she missed her opportunity to eat it, but they did slaughter Korban Pesach with her in mind, and that's why she doesn't do it in the makeup day a month later. But now, and therefore, that's exactly Rav. Mikan, right? We're going to count it in 2 ways. That day, even though she saw blood the day before, and theoretically this is her second day, so she saw blood and you would think to connect them. No, really, when she went to the mikveh in the morning and she was pure, she didn't see any blood, we're going to say that counts as pure day. Later, she sees blood, that's an impure day. We're going to count it both ways, basically. And that's like shivim oleh l'kan u'l'kan. To which they say, wait a minute. Umisava Rabbi Yossi Hachi, does Rabbi Yossi really hold this way? That, we're dealing with the second part of what he said. Mitzad hayom kikulo maybe, but the fact that when this woman sees blood later on day number 2, we're going to say any impurities she dealt with earlier in the day, any purities she was dealing with are not impure retroactively, that we're only going to view her as impure from now. First of all, wasn't it connected to day 1? And shouldn't it be a continuum? And we're going to show a source where he does view it as a continuum. So we're now going to question that assumption, which then if we answer that the fact is he doesn't hold what we just thought he held, then it's not going to be a proof for Rav. And we can't say Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi. So now the Gemara says, why do we think that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold this way? V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita? Rabbi Yossi omer, zav. Now we're getting to a man. A man has a discharge. It's not a bloody discharge. It's a clear discharge, zav. And the rules are a bit different. The way it works for a man is 1 re'iyah is just 1 day of tumah. Okay, fine. He waits to see. He's like a shomer yom keneged yom. Once you see 2, okay, now this is not 2 days, it's 2 discharges. Once he has a second discharge, he already has to wait 7 clean days. But if he sees 3, then he not only has to wait 7 clean days, he also has to bring a sacrifice. 2 requires you to wait 7 clean days, but no sacrifice. 3 requires you also a sacrifice. So he already saw 2. And now, shachatu v'zarku alav b'shvi. Now it's up to Korban Pesach of his. And it's day number 7 of his 7 clean days. And he went to the mikveh in the morning, because that's what a zav does in a zava. They go to the mikveh in the morning. And they slaughtered the Korban Pesach. He didn't have, right? It was a clean day. Everything was fine. V'chein shomeret yom, keneged yom, or our previous case of this woman, sheshachatu v'zarku alav achar kach ra'u, exactly the case we saw. They slaughtered. She was in day number 2. She didn't have any blood. Everything was good. And then after she had bleeding, afal pi, now here's the key line, shemitamim mishkav umoshav lemafreya, and this is Rabbi Yossi speaking, even though anything they sat on that day or lied on, and that's all this tumah, that's a special unique tumah by Zav and Zava and some others, they're mitamim mishkav umoshav lemafreya, anything they sat on that day, anything they were lying on, all that is impure going back to the morning. So we do treat them as impure for that day. Still, pturim milasot Pesach Sheni. Okay, but right now, we're not really concerned with why they're exempt from Pesach Sheni. The point is, their tumah does go retroactively. So he can't say l'kadu l'kan, because he does view it as they were completely tameh that entire day. How we deal with the Korban Pesach is a good question. So we'll get to it. So first the Gemara says, we have an answer to that. It's just a chumrah. Really? The halacha is you're not impure, and that's why you don't have to do another makeup Korban Pesach. But we're going to basically say, because it doesn't look right, any impurities you dealt with, midirabanan, we're going to say it's a problem. And hachinami mistabra, as I said a second ago, and it makes sense to say this, because if we really think that you were impure on a Torah level, then how could you possibly have fulfilled your obligation of Korban Pesach? So it must be, it's Rabbanan, and then everything works fine. Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi, it counts l'kanu l'kan. We're just going to be extra strict and say all your tumas l'mafrei are a problem, everything retroactively you sat on, all that is going to be a problem, but that's rabbinic, that's an extra stringency. But letter of the law, we actually treat you were pure in the morning and impure in the afternoon. But the Gemara suggests a different way. And then you couldn't really connect Rabbi Yossi with this. And to whom does zava hitir? We can give you a different reason why Pesach will be different than Mishkav u'Moshav and Tumah. When it comes to Tumah, maybe it is actually Torah level, and the Tumah goes back, in which case you can't say it counts l'kanu l'kan. This is a special, unique halacha by Korban Pesach, that if it's Tumah Tahom, what's Tumah Tahom? Tahom is in the depths. Okay, what the real source for it is if you go over a place where there's a dead body deep, deep, deep down, and you had no idea they were there. So we're going to be lenient with you when it comes to Korban Pesach. We're not going to count you as tameh because you didn't know. In other words, if you find out later that there was a grave all the way down, but you didn't know at the time, it wasn't a noticeable tumah. Okay, this is the same thing. You didn't know at the time you were impure because you had no blood that day. You went to the mikveh, everything was fine. You had no idea you were a zava. So this is what we call tumah tahom of zava, okay, or zav. So this person had no idea that they were impure, and they did the Korban Pesach thinking all was fine. In that case, you're actually fulfilling your obligation, even though it turned out that later on you became tameh, and retroactively it turns out you were tameh because you had already a riyah yesterday, or you have blood yesterday. So maybe it's a unique halacha by Korban Pesach, and then we're stuck, because then you can't say Rabbi Yossi fits in with Rabbi Yossi, because he doesn't count it in two ways. Only for this unique halacha for Korban Pesach. When it comes to Tumah, it's actually midoraita, your tameh starting from day one all the way through day two. Even though you went to the mikveh, it doesn't make a difference. Once you start bleeding, it undoes what you did. But now we're going to go back to saying, really, maybe Rabbi Yossi does hold that it's only d'Rabbanan, and we're going to bring Rabbi Yoshia, who holds that Savar l'mafreya mid'Rabbanan, that this tumah of Mishkav u'Moshav is really only retroactive. And for this, we're just going to really get started a little bit, and we'll finish this tomorrow. It says in a braita, Rabbi Yoshi Amar, so now this is what we saw before. If you see blood on day 7, let's say you went to the mikvah and you saw blood on, you had a discharge on day 7. You're a man, you had a discharge on day 7. You have to go all the way back to the beginning because you need 7 clean days in a row. This is like a woman, right? You see blood on day 7, it cancels them all. Amarle Rabbi Yochanan lo nistor ela yomo. Rabbi Yochanan says just the 7th day, and then you just got to keep one more clean day. To which the Gemara says, that doesn't make any sense, Rabbi Yochanan. Manafshach, isatar, kulusatar. Either it cancels it, it's a problem, and then it should cancel all the days because you need 7 clean days, and you don't have, in continuum. Or ilo satar, and if it's not a problem, when the lo nistor velo yomo, then it shouldn't even cancel that day. To which they say, lo nistor velo yomo. If you see on day 7, remember, you go to the mikveh in the morning. So you already have miktzat hayom. So if it's some part of the day you were fine, and you see on day 7, it doesn't cancel anything according to Rabbi Yochanan. We're not finished yet. We're going to continue this discussion into tomorrow's daf, but eventually we're going to try to show from Rabbi Yossi, you can learn that l'mafreya is d'Rabbanan, and then we show that Rabbi Yossi is saying l'mafreya is d'Rabbanan, And then Rav can fit in with Rabbi Yossi, because again, it's only a stringency that we're going to go back and make you impure, but really that day can be counted both as pure and as impure, just like we could count day 70 as 70 and 71. So what we did in the last part of this daf was really all we were trying to do was to try to find a tanna that holds like the Rav could say, I hold by that tanna. We tried Abba Shaul when it came to Avilut. In the end, we couldn't prove it because one can distinguish between Avilut and Nazilut. One is Torah, one is rabbinic. And therefore, he might have been lenient in Avilut, but he wouldn't necessarily say the same thing by Torah law. Then we tried to bring Rabbi Yossi, where we have two ways of understanding Rabbi Yossi. Does he really hold you're really fully pure in the morning and impure in the afternoon? And then we could say it's just like the rabbis, or maybe he really seems to hold, no, we're just by Korban Pesach, it's a unique law. But when it comes to impurity, we're actually viewing you as impure from the morning. And then we can't say it goes both ways, in which case we can't prove Rav from here. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day.